How to hear the audible voice of God. One of the things many people desire is to know how to hear the audible voice of God. Many people continue to doubt if God speaks or even communicates with them because they don't hear his audible voice. That is the essence. Several persons are always asking, how can I hear the audible voice of God? Because they know that hearing the audible voice of God will give them assurance that it is God that is speaking to them, or they are hearing God's voice. In this video, I will be explaining to you explicitly on how to hear the audible voice of God. And I tell you the truth, after watching this video, you will definitely hear God's voice. Please like this video and follow this page if you want more content like this. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Now, one of the things I want you to know about hearing the voice of God is that God often speaks to us spirit to spirit and not spirit to flesh. Occasionally, God speaks to us spirit to flesh only when necessary, but God often speaks to us spirit to spirit through the help of the Holy Spirit. The inner voice of God is the spirit to spirit voice of God. Anyone desiring to hear the voice of God must desire to receive God's voice in his spirit. One thing about hearing the voice of God in the spirit is to subject your soul to the leading of the Holy Spirit. As the Bible said in Romans 8 verse 14, as many that are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. This means that for one to experience the great move of God, the soul must be subject to the leading of the Spirit. So once the soul is subjected to the leading of the Spirit, the man will experience the things of the Spirit. But if the soul is far from the Spirit leading, the man can't experience God's move or even hear God's voice, because God deals with us from spirit to spirit. The more you subject your soul to the Spirit, the more you hear God's voice. When your soul begins to unite with the leading of the Spirit, then it becomes intimacy with God. Your intimacy level determines the spirit level you operate in. It is not difficult to hear God when your soul is subject to the leading of the Spirit. The frequency for you to receive from the Spirit is for you to subject your soul to the Spirit. Listen carefully. God does not want to speak to us from spirit to flesh, because in the flesh we can't experience the Spirit, have intimacy with God, or hear God's voice due to our carnal state. Are we together? The voice of God in the Spirit communicating to man's spirit is harmonious, operating under the atmosphere of stillness. This simply means the soul must stay quiet for the Spirit to lead. The noise of the soul is the state of the flesh. So when the soul is in a fleshy state, it is considered noisy. But when the soul is subjected under the leading of the Spirit, then it is considered harmonious. In other words, the closer you are to the Spirit, the louder you hear God's voice. Anyone whose soul is harmonious with the Spirit will definitely hear God's voice at the rate at which his soul is harmonious to the Spirit. For example, when a man is far away from a speaker, he won't hear the audible sound of the speaker. But the closer he is to the speaker, the louder or audible he hears the speaker's sound. Spirit's intimacy is simply defined as your soul relating with the Spirit. And if your soul is relating to the Spirit, it means your soul and the Spirit are in good terms. That is, they are in harmonious, rubbing mind and ideas together. So at that point, the Spirit will hear the soul and the soul will hear the Spirit clearly. Are we together now? In intimacy, friendship is needed, and if this friendship have to stay intact, each person must stay and perform their duties to maintain a good relationship. So, for a good relationship, your soul must stay calm and humble for the spirit to influence. This is why we need to be quiet within our souls and let the Holy Spirit flow through, delivering God's message unto us. So we need to meditate, reading the word, praying, fasting, and performing other spiritual exercise that will help our souls stay harmonious with the Spirit, enabling us to receive from Him. Now, when someone can't receive God's voice in the Spirit and God wants to communicate something vital to that person, He speaks from spirit to flesh. This is where encounter counts, and this encounter significantly impacts one's life. When God speaks from spirit to flesh, His voice sounds audible, but if the person is not careful, they might become deaf due to the loudness. For example, when God spoke to Saul, who was later called Paul in Acts 9, God spoke to him from spirit to flesh. That is the essence. The manifestation at which God spoke to him was revealed in the flesh. Everyone around him heard the voice as Saul did, because God spoke from spirit to flesh. Since Saul was carnal, God had to speak to him in the flesh. After hearing God's voice, Saul became blind and very weak to walk, demonstrating that receiving God's voice in the flesh can be overwhelming. So, hearing God's voice in the flesh is not safe for humanity, as it can sound like thunder and fire, causing blindness and deafness. That is why God speaks to our spirit, not flesh. Another example, in Exodus 19, the Israelites asked Moses to let God speak to them. When God did, His voice sounded like a cloud of fire, prompting them to ask Moses to intervene. You see, the voice of God that ought to be amazing now looks very scary and sound awkward because they were receiving the voice in the flesh. But Moses heard God's voice in the spirit, making the experience less overwhelming. This topic will be explained further in my next teaching. So, if you desire to hear the audible voice of God, build a good intimacy with God by subjecting your soul to the Spirit. And I tell you the truth, you will hear the audible voice of God. So the essence, several persons don't hear the voice of God, is that they don't pay attention to their spirit and subject their soul to the leading of the Spirit. And when you subject your soul to the leading of the Spirit, you will begin to receive the prompting, you will begin to receive God's voice from the Spirit, because intimacy is related to sharing ideas and communicating from one person to another. So God is always communicating to you. The essence why you are not hearing His voice audibly is that your intimacy with God is very low and you are not subjecting your soul to the leading of the Spirit. And once you subject your soul to the leading of the Spirit, you will definitely hear the audible voice of God. This is where I will stop in this video. If you are blessed by this video, please like this video and follow this page if you want more content like this. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. See you on my next teaching.